Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Yeah,
This time we're going to be tackling forced resignation in India.
that's right.
As always, we're joined by our expert who's got some fascinating insights from Indian law firms.
Yeah.
And we're even going to be looking at some court cases.
Yeah, we've got some pretty interesting cases that really give a good picture of
Yeah.
this whole issue.
Okay, so let's just jump right into it. First off, what exactly is forced resignation?
Well, think of it this way, like if your boss wants you out but doesn't want to fire you directly,
Okay.
they try and make your life so miserable that you have no choice but to quit.
Right.
So like they're kind of pushing you out the door, but it's not.
Yeah.
Like they're firing you directly.
Right, so it's like making it look like you chose to leave.
Exactly. And the legal term is constructive dismissal.
Oh, okay.
And it can involve like demotions or a pay cut or just impossible workloads
Yeah.
or even just harassment.
Wow, that's awful. But isn't that illegal?
You're right. It is illegal in India. The main thing is for resignation to be valid.
Okay.
It has to be voluntary.
Okay, so there are laws in place to protect employees from this.
Absolutely. There's one called the Industrial Disputes Act of 1947.
Okay.
And this outlines certain procedures that employers have to follow if they want to terminate someone's employment.
Okay.
Like they have to give notice periods and adequate compensation.
Okay, so if a company's trying to push somebody out the door, they're actually breaking the law.
Exactly.
Okay.
So when it's not voluntary, it's considered an involuntary termination.
Right.
Which means the employee can actually take legal action against their employer.
Wow, that's interesting. So it sounds like employees have a little bit more power than they realize in this situation.
Yeah, they definitely do.
But what about the HR department? Where do they fit into all of this?
HR has got a really tough job with this because they have to make sure the company is following the law.
Right.
But then at the same time, they're dealing with all this pressure from management. Who might be the ones who are pushing for this forced resignation?
Right, so they're kind of walking this tightrope
Yeah.
between,
They are.
yeah, protecting the company, but then also
Yeah.
making sure things are ethical and legal.
Yeah, it's really a balancing act for them.
Yeah, I could see how that would be really tricky.
It is.
Okay, well, let's get into the motivations behind why a company would want to do this in the first place.
Okay.
Why would they try and push somebody out instead of just firing them directly?
Well, one of the big reasons is cost cutting.
Yeah.
Companies don't want to have to pay severance packages
Oh, right.
and all the costs associated with a formal termination.
So they're basically just trying to save money.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And it's not just severance pay either.
Okay.
There's also the issue of statutory benefits.
What are statutory benefits?
So these are benefits that are mandated by law.
Okay.
Things like bonuses and gratuity payments that employees get over time as they're working at the company. And if they force somebody out, they sometimes don't have to pay those.
Wow, that just seems so wrong.
It does raise some ethical concerns.
Yeah.
And there's also the issue of performance appraisals.
What do you mean?
Well, some companies, they'll manipulate those performance evaluations
Oh, wow.
to try and make the employee look bad, even if it's not really true.
So they're like setting them up to fail.
Pretty much. And this can have some pretty big consequences for the company.
Okay, so what kind of risks are companies taking when they do this?
Okay, well, first there's the legal problems.
Right.
The employees have the right to sue for wrongful termination.
Right.
And then there could be all these legal battles.
Yeah.
Expensive settlements that could end up costing them way more than if they'd just let them go properly.
So it's not even a good financial strategy.
It's not. And then there's the reputation.
Right.
Word gets out they're doing this, it's going to hurt their image.
Right. Nobody wants to work for a company.
Nobody wants to work there. Nobody wants to do business with them.
That's right.
And the people who are still there, their morale is going to go down.
Right. It creates a toxic work environment.
Exactly. It really does. And then you have more turnover.
So it's bad for everybody involved.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. We've talked about what it is, why it's illegal, some of the risks involved. What are some things that companies can do to create a better work environment
Okay.
so that their employees feel safe and respected and that this is less likely to happen?
Well, the first thing is to have really strong HR policies.
Okay.
And these policies should say, no forced resignation.
Yeah.
We're going to encourage voluntary separation
Okay.
and be transparent about it.
So if an employee wants to leave, there's a clear and respectful way to do it.
Yeah, and we're going to outline all the legal alternatives to forced resignation,
Like what?
like voluntary retirement schemes
Oh.
or performance improvement plans.
So you give employees a genuine choice.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
you treat them fairly whether they stay or whether they go.
Right. And be transparent about everything.
Yes, transparency is key.
So no more hiding behind the legalese, hoping that nobody asks any questions.
Right. You have to be really upfront with employees.
Right.
Tell them their options, their rights,
Right.
what the processes are.
Okay. And then also create reporting systems.
Yes.
So employees can report if they feel like they're being coerced.
Yes. They need to feel safe speaking up.
Right. So like an anonymous tip line or something like that?
Yeah. Or a way to report to an independent third party.
Right.
Something like that.
Okay. Now I'm thinking about what about the situations that aren't black and white?
Okay.
So an employee does resign, but then they say, I was pressured into this. How do you prove something like that?
That's why you need to have documentation.
Right.
So companies need to keep records of performance evaluations,
Okay.
disciplinary actions, communication about the resignation.
So if there's ever a dispute, you have something to refer back to.
Exactly. And clear communication is also really important.
Right.
The companies have to be very clear about what they expect from employees and what the consequences are.
Okay.
And that can help prevent some of these misunderstandings.
Right. So it comes back to transparency
It really does.
and open communication.
Yes, and building that respect
Right.
between the company and the employees.
This is great.
Yeah.
I think our listeners have a much deeper understanding now
I hope so.
of what forced resignation is, why it's illegal,
Yeah.
and some of the things that can be done to prevent it.
Right.
But I'm curious about those court cases that you mentioned at the beginning.
We've got some really fascinating cases.
Yeah, I think that'll really help our listeners understand how this plays out in the real world.
They really show how complex this can be.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Well, let's dive into those in part 2.
Okay, so you want to hear about some real-life cases, huh?
Yeah.
These are really interesting because they kind of show how the courts are handling these situations.
Right.
And, like the whole idea of constructive dismissal.
Yeah. I think it would be really helpful for our listeners to kind of see how this all plays out in the real world.
Yeah, for sure. One that comes to mind is Vinod Pathak versus American Express Bank Ltd.
Okay.
This one was back in 2015.
Right. What happened there?
So Mr. Pathak was working as a security in charge at American Express.
Okay.
And he claimed that he was forced to resign. So he filed a lawsuit.
Oh, wow.
He wanted to get his job back and get back pay and benefits.
So he was saying his resignation wasn't voluntary.
Exactly. But here's the interesting part. The court looked really closely at his contract.
Okay.
And it said that either side could terminate the agreement with just 1 month's notice
Okay.
or pay in lieu of notice.
So the contract was a big deal here.
It was. And because American Express had given him that notice period payment,
Okay.
they dismissed his case.
Wow. So even if he felt pressure, the fact that they followed the contract,
Yeah.
that made a difference.
It did. So this shows how important it is to have a clear contract that's
Yeah.
legally sound.
Yeah.
Because it can be really hard for employees to prove anything. If the company can show that they were just following the rules.
Even if it doesn't feel right,
Exactly.
It's not always easy to prove it.
It's not.
What other cases are there?
Okay, so another one is Air India Express Ltd. Versus Gurdarshan Kar Sandhu.
Okay.
This was 2019. And this was a pilot
Okay.
who resigned and then tried to withdraw her resignation.
Oh, so she changed her mind.
She did, but Air India said, no, you can't take it back.
Wow.
And this case actually went to the Supreme Court.
All the way to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
What did they decide?
Well, the Supreme Court said she had the right to resign,
Okay.
but they also said that notice periods are super important,
Okay.
especially in a job like that.
Right. You can't just have pilots.
Right. You
Yeah.
need that time to find a replacement and train them so
Right.
it doesn't disrupt everything.
Right. So they had to balance her right to resign
Right.
with the company's need to keep things running smoothly.
Exactly. And in the end, Air India won
Okay.
because those notice periods are just so critical, for something like that.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a tough situation.
Yeah.
But I understand why they made that decision.
Yeah. And then there's another one I think you'll find interesting. This is X versus Registrar, MP, High Court.
Okay. This is a high court case. What happened there?
So this was in 2022.
Okay.
And it was about a judge who was transferred
Okay.
to a different location.
Right.
And she felt like it was done unfairly.
Oh, okay.
Like there were personal reasons behind it and stuff.
So not directly about resignation.
Right, but she ended up resigning because of it.
Oh, I see.
And then she said, That wasn't really voluntary. I was forced out.
Oh,
It was
yeah.
constructive dismissal.
Right. So even though she resigned,
Yeah.
it was because of that whole situation.
Yeah. And the Supreme Court actually agreed with her.
They did.
Yeah. They said the transfer wasn't done properly.
Okay.
You know, it violated their own policies.
Oh, wow.
So basically, they put her in a position where she felt like she had no choice but to resign.
So they were forcing her out, even though they didn't say, you have to quit.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this one's important because it shows that it's not always about someone saying,
Right.
you need to resign. Sometimes it's about creating a hostile work environment and putting pressure on people in different ways.
And the courts are recognizing that.
They are.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So it's not always black and white.
It's not.
There are a lot of gray areas here.
There are.
And this case really shows that.
Yeah. It sends a message to companies
Right.
that you can't just get around the law by being sneaky about it.
Right. You can't just create a situation
Right.
where somebody feels like they have to quit.
Exactly. You can't do that.
These examples are so helpful.
Yeah.
I think it really helps to see how these real life situations
Yeah.
play out.
Yeah. They're really interesting cases.
They are.
Yeah.
And it just shows you how complex it is.
Yeah.
And how important it is to know your rights
Absolutely.
if you're in this kind of situation.
Knowledge is power.
That's right.
For sure.
So we've talked about the legal side of things and some of the cases.
Right.
But what about some practical advice
Okay.
for our listeners who might be going through this right now?
Yeah.
What can they actually do
That's a great question.
if they feel like they're being pressured to resign?
And that's what we're going to talk about in part 3.
Okay, great.
We'll get into some really helpful tips.
All right, perfect. Well, let's get to that then.
All right. So we're going to give you some practical tips right now.
Yeah, let's get into it.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you're thinking, this is happening to me,
Yeah.
what can I do?
Okay. First of all, don't panic.
Okay.
It's going to be okay. There are things that you can do.
Okay.
It's like having a toolkit
All right.
of legal options ready.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So what's tool number 1?
Documentation.
Okay.
Document everything. Write it down. Anytime you feel pressure to quit. Dates, times, conversations. Who said what?
Okay, so like keep a journal.
Yes. A
Oh.
work journal, basically. Like
no.
you're building a case. Even if you hope you never have to use it,
Well,
save everything. Emails, letters, performance reviews, anything that shows what's going on.
right.
Because people forget. And you need that clear record.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, what about if the pressure is more subtle?
Okay.
It's not like they're saying you have to quit,
Right.
but, the vibes are off.
Yeah, you got to cover your assets.
Okay, how do you do that?
If they give you these crazy tasks,
Right.
you document everything you do to try and clarify things,
Okay.
get instructions in writing.
Right.
Basically, you need to show that you're trying to do your job right,
Right.
even though it's really hard.
So if things do go south, you have proof it wasn't you.
Exactly. It was the situation.
Okay, good tip.
What else? Tool number 2, know your company's policies.
Okay.
Resignation, termination,
Okay.
grievance procedures, all that stuff. If they're not following their own rules,
Right.
that's a good thing for you.
So back to the employee handbook.
Yes. Dust it off.
Okay.
Read the Industrial Disputes Act. That's the one from 1947.
Oh.
Know the laws that protect you.
This is great. I'm already feeling more empowered.
Good.
It's like I have more control of the situation,
Yeah.
not just a victim.
Yeah.
Okay, so what's tool number 3?
Talk to HR.
Oh, okay.
They should be neutral,
Right.
helping the company and the employees.
But what if HR is not helpful?
That happens.
Yeah.
But even if they're not helpful, document the interaction.
Okay.
It shows that you tried to resolve things the right way.
Okay, so again, that paper trail.
Exactly.
Okay, now if things are really bad,
Okay.
like really, really bad, and you just feel like you can't take it anymore,
Yeah.
what should you do?
You might need to talk to a lawyer.
Okay.
An employment lawyer can really help.
Okay.
They know all about these laws and your options.
A lot of people might hesitate to involve lawyers.
I know, but it's not about losing. It's about protecting yourself.
Okay.
Even just a consultation
Right.
can really help.
Yeah, clear things up. Even if you don't need them to represent you.
Yeah, and it can give you some peace of mind.
Right. And it's important to remember,
Yeah.
even if you do resign,
Yeah,
if you were pressured, you can still fight it.
exactly. The courts are really starting to understand this.
Right.
The whole idea of constructive dismissal.
Like we talked about in the previous parts.
Mhm.
Okay, this has been so helpful.
Good, I'm
I
glad.
feel like I've learned so much.
You know, knowledge is power.
It is. And even though this is a really tough topic,
Yeah, it's not fun.
no.
It's not fun.
At least now,
But now...
You have some tools.
Right. We know what to do.
Exactly.
And for our listeners who are employers listening to this,
Yeah.
be careful.
Yeah.
Cutting corners might seem like a good idea at first.
Yeah, in the short term.
But in the long run, it could really backfire.
Big time.
Legally, your reputation, your employees.
Yeah, treat your employees well.
Right.
Create a good work environment.
Be transparent.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you'll have a great team. Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today.
You're welcome.
This has been really insightful.
Right.
And to our listeners, we'll see you next time.